Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be looking at 10 more films in my 52 film challenge that I have watched this year. That puts me to 18 films on the year, and as I am filming this, I am about 22 weeks into the year, so we're about 4 films behind, and I may have to do a movie day soon to make that up. That being said, I have changed a couple things with the challenge. First of all, I am going to more of a general format where I don't have to pick a movie off of each category or sort through the list to see which movie matches with which list and make sure I have one on each list. Just makes it simpler. I'm going to watch 52 films that are either on the Criterion channel or on Criterion disc. And that in of itself is a challenge and has presented some great films that I'm going to review today in this video. Film number one that we're looking at today, the 9th film that I watched as part of this challenge, is Yi Yi, and this is a Taiwanese film made in the year 2000 from director Edward Yang, and really just an incredible way that this film portrays subtle beauty of family relationships. It follows sort of the falling into a coma of the extended family's grandmother and all the interconnected plots of their business deals and their relationships and things like that in this family. And even like Yang Yang is like a 6-year-old boy, but he's one of the main characters, and he's just a fascinating character in this film. The things that he does and the way that his mind works really reminds me of Oliver Assayas a lot in some of the ways that it portrays these really relatable scenarios to the audience. And I really enjoy these sorts of subtle family dramas that are like the Yis of the world. For the 10th film on this list, I watched the 1970s film The Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie, and in many senses kind of defines what people think of Bowie, and maybe not something that caused what people think of Bowie, but something that falls in line with that. A very spacey film, and it is about an alien who is played by David Bowie, who launches himself to Earth and hopes to come back someday, build a rocket to come back and save his wife and 2 kids who are stranded on what we suppose is a deserted, famine-stricken planet somewhere out there in the universe. And I do think that this film dragged on at points, but it was really unique and presented some really interesting scenarios. Again, some scenes could have been cut and still sticking to that really out there spacey vibe, but overall I definitely enjoyed it. Next comes Only Lovers Left Alive, a early 2000s film from Jim Jarmusch, and it is a vampire film but takes a very unique twist on that, which I loved. And I am a huge fan of Jarmusch, but this is a really, I was really excited to see this. It doesn't quite match up to what I envision to be the insanely high standards of a Mystery Train or Down by Law, but in its own right, very unique and good. Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston playing the vampires do an incredible job. And the twist that this takes that's really unique is these vampires, which I don't think this part of it is what's exactly unique, but these vampires are thousands of years old. And what's unique about it is that it's not a violent movie in any sense. They're buying their bloods from hospitals, and they're kind of living these secluded, recluse lives where they're really engaged with their hobbies that they've mastered over the years, and where they are battling with depression of being alive and immortal. And it really captures some interesting ideas that I don't think I've ever seen portrayed anywhere else. The 1986 film Manhunter by Michael Mann was I believe the original Hannibal Lecter film, which follows the same plot almost as Silence of the Lambs and is a precursor to Silence of the Lambs. But despite this being a very good film, I do think that Silence of the Lambs does it much better in many ways, stylistically, with the camera work and with the acting, and even a little bit with the plot. But this movie just blares 80s, and it was probably one of the most 80s movies I've ever seen. And if you watch it, you'll probably understand that. But a fun one to watch for sure. For lucky number 13 on my watch list, I have Brian De Palma's film Dressed to Kill, and I think many people consider this an iconic film, and I can definitely see why. Had some really beautiful, really cool scenes, which I thought was like in the beginning where the camera sort of follows the woman and the man through the museum in New York, and I believe that's the Met that is following them through. And then also the shower dream scene towards the end was also very incredible and inspired me too in my writing a little bit. In terms of the plot, kind of follows this one psychologist and his patients who are involved with a serial killer that is a transgender serial killer who is taking that out in a very, very violent way, which you wouldn't necessarily expect to see, but I think is well done in this movie. For the 14th film on my list, I watched the French film Demonlover by Oliver Assayas, and this is definitely somewhat lower down on my list of films to watch by Assayas. It doesn't, for me, carry the same sense of relatableness as his other films that I just really enjoy, similar to what I mentioned with Yi Yi. But that being said, the reason it doesn't is because this film is mainly about two women who work in a French porn production slash internet company. And these women are not necessarily in the line of, filming or being in the films. They are more negotiating contracts and buyouts, things along those lines. But inevitably, people are exploited, and it has that cutthroat feel to it, which I think gives you some really interesting thoughts and really makes you appalled at some things. So definitely a good and interesting one to watch. For my 15th film on this list, I watched Space is the Place, which is basically just a 90-minute music video by jazz musician Sun Ra. And in it, he plays a game with this character named the Overseer, who is another black man who has a competing idea about what the black race should do in response to racism, um, and and how intense it is, I guess. Um, and that's kind of the argument of this movie, and they take various stories uh, to show basically Sun Ra talking about molecularly transporting black people to live in space because they can't coexist with white people. And I really don't want to put any words in his mouth that he didn't specifically say, but he does mention and talk about those things in this film. Um, I thought some of the music was really cool, and I do draw some parallels between that game that Sun Ra and the Overseer were playing and that epic chess match with Death and Ingmar Bergman's film The Seventh Seal. So, and next I watched Inland Empire by David Lynch, which, as far as films go, I was just slightly disappointed because it had the least coherent plot line of any Lynch film I've seen, which already tend to have somewhat incoherent and loosely structured plot lines. And this was definitely loosely structured. Even if you read interviews with him later, he talks about how they had no screenplay going into filming this, which I don't think acts as a pro in this case. That being said, depending on how you see it, it definitely could make it the best word Lynch film or the worst Lynch film. And most likely, it's just somewhere right in the middle, which is why I give it 3.5 stars. I think it's got some cool imagery and scenes, and it's enjoyable because Lynch is a good artist and he's good at what he does. But I do think that that structure, like you have in a Blue Velvet or a Twin Peaks, a storyline where you're involved in the characters, makes it more interesting. For the second to last film in this batch, I watched the 1953 film Niagara, starring Marilyn Monroe and Joseph Cotten. And I watched this film specifically because it was starring Marilyn Monroe. They had a collection of her films on the Criterion channel, and I figured I should watch one since she's a pretty big figure in American culture and history about back then and even a little bit today. It was one of those old films that I watched that felt like an old film. It was the plot was like slightly hokey and predictable in certain ways. Even the twists felt hokey. That being said, it did have some great one-liners. I particularly laughed out loud. One of the main male characters says, "Your husband doesn't like music very much, does he?" When Cotton breaks a vinyl record with his hands. And that was just a funny moment in the film. And there were several of those sorts of humorous cracks throughout the film, which made it worth watching. So, last of these 10 films, and definitely the best, is Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa. And when I watched this, I was blown away. Easiest 5 star, one of the easiest 5 stars. I shouldn't say easiest of my life. Instantly slips into at least the top 100 films for me. It follows a very heavy topic of three men who are sitting around under this sort of pagoda in a rainstorm discussing this incident that one of them was a direct eyewitness of, and two of them were in court hearing of, where a famous bandit raped someone's wife in front of them in the woods, and then the husband did it, proceed to die. The interesting thing is that it kind of goes from all perspectives, and everyone claims that somebody else killed the husband. You know, the bandit claims it was himself. The wife claims it was her. Even even the husband, through an intermediary, claims that it was himself. I think that this is just a really hard to grasp piece of cinema. If you really want to, you could sit with this for a while because it's very deep. So my hat's off to Kurosawa for that. I can understand why this is considered one of the greatest films of all time. Thanks for learning and watching films 9 through 18 with me in this challenge. If you have any suggestions of criterions to watch, drop them in the comments below and I will probably get to them. And on top of that, if you want to see more of these videos, subscribe. And I also have some literature and other philosophical book videos that come out from time to time. I will see you guys next time.